Untamed Passion by Melissa Summers. Voices acted by Delaney Gilmour and Nick at Nick's voice. Both available on Fiverr. Chapter 1. A new beginning. It's great to be outside, especially today. The early winter sun picked up all the little beads of dew on the greenery. Kim felt like she was walking through a starry sky. The birds who were early enough to already have caught their worm were watching Kim walk away from her car, hiking gear ready to go. As a travel agent, Kim was used to being stuck behind a desk, planning other people's adventures. This time, it was her turn. She had spent too much time at the gym, jogging on the treadmill with a nature trail display on the screen. That was a great way to maintain her fitness, but it was nothing like the challenge of nature itself. She looked like the typical gym bunny, average height, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a great smile, but she was also very intelligent, funny, and stubborn to be her best self. As the hours passed and the sun climbed higher in the sky, Kim brushed the sweat and hair away from her eyes. Today was one of the first multi-day hikes that she had planned. She was determined that she would complete the Knoll Heritage Trail next year for her 30th birthday. If she was going to set a goal for herself, why not a crazy one? Kim had made great progress on the first day of her hike. She arrived at the first campsite with plenty of time to set up camp, start a fire, and cook dinner. Watching the sky turn darker, she sighed a deep breath of contentment, pleased that she started the hike today. It was great to be outside. The sun in her eyes woke Kim in the morning. Stretching big, she climbed out of her sleeping bag, ready to start the day. Answering the call of nature, Kim tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, even though it felt like every single bird, insect, and animal in the local area had eyes on her.
Well, if I want to do these kinds of hikes, I need to get used to this,
thought Kim. Scanning around, checking to make sure that she wasn't giving some early hikers a show and a fright, there was no one. Tidying up, Kim wished that the feeling of being watched would disappear, but as she packed up her camp and started back on her trail, the feeling increased. Picking up her pace, her head on a swivel, the sound of snapping twigs and shifting rocks kept Kim on high alert. Obviously, there would be sounds of nature during a nature hike, but this felt different. It felt wrong. It felt dangerous. It felt like she was being stalked. Kim had done her research and knew that there were plenty of dangerous animals about. Wolves, bears, cougars, or worst of them all, moose. She didn't like her chances with any of those animals.
Calm down. You're overthinking it again. It's probably just a bunch of rabbits,
she thought to herself. Kim's pace didn't slow though. She continued trudging through the woods, alert to any movement among the trees. After an hour or two, the noises had started to fade. The birds were singing more loudly, and Kim sighed in relief. Whatever may or may not have been following her had lost interest. Able to enjoy the hike again, Kim slowed a little, finding a glade in the woods, with a small stream that reflected off the multiple colors from the surrounding wildflowers and perfect blue sky.
Well, since I spent a while rushing this morning, I think I have time to stop and have a little lunch here.
Setting her bag down near the water, Kim chewed while listening to the birds and the insects.
At least my paranoia this morning paid off. It's beautiful here.
Shaking off the panicked feelings of the morning, Kim restarted her hike feeling refreshed and more comfortable. The day passed and Kim hadn't reached her second campsite. Pulling out her map, she tried to determine how much further it was. Looking for landmarks and trail markers that weren't around, she realized that she wasn't on her hiking trail anymore.
I must have stepped onto a wildlife trail by accident. That's okay. I'll find it again soon. I'm probably just a little to the east.
Heading west, she looked for anything that might give a clue to where she was. Another hour passed, and nothing. It was beginning to get dark. She needed to find the trail or find a place to camp, ASAP. Traveling in the dark would only lead to her getting more lost or injuring herself. Despite frantically searching for any sign of the main trail, the sun disappeared behind the trees and the mountains, and Kim was forced to stop. There was no denying it. She was lost. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Woods. Setting up the camping lantern, Kim pulled out all of her gear and went through it. First grabbing her phone and waving it slowly around, hoping for any reception at all.
Just a single bar. Please. Why didn't I wait until I had enough money to buy that satellite phone? So stupid.
Putting it aside, she checked each piece of equipment, making sure everything was there and functional. The last thing she needed right now was to find out something wasn't working when she needed it most. The act of going through everything helped calm Kim down. As scared as she was, she needed to remain as calm as possible in order to get herself out of this situation. Fear and panic could only be life-ending at a time like this. Luckily, she was a naturally cautious person, so Kim went through her safety plan.
I have enough food and water.
Kim ticked off her imaginary list with her finger.
I can sleep here tonight and hike up to higher ground in the morning. At least that way I might be able to see a structure or a larger landmark and make my way towards it.
Packing her gear away, she lay down to sleep, glad she had at least purchased a nicer sleeping bag, as starting a campfire on this cool night might attract unwanted attention from the local wildlife. Kim was a few hours into her hike up the mountain when she heard it.
What is that?
A strange, growling, groaning noise. She wondered, squatting low, whatever it was, she didn't want it to find her first. She started to creep along low, hoping to move past the noise and continue on her hike, hopefully to safety. But the noise seemed to grow louder, even when she moved in other directions. Kim stopped to listen, to see if she could pinpoint where the noise was coming from. Looking around, she spotted a bear, low on the ground, chewing on something.
Shit!
Thought Kim, holding as still as possible.
Please don't see me.
Kim continued to wait, hoping that the bear would eat whatever it had and leave. But after a while, it didn't look like the bear was eating something, more like it was chewing on an itchy spot. Its growls and groans sounded more annoyed than angry.
Please leave.
Kim repeated in her head, hoping that something, anything would drive the bear away. Time passed, and Kim knew she couldn't stay much longer. It looked like the bear was staying put, and since it hadn't seen or smelt her yet, her best bet might be to circle around the bear. Creeping as low and slow as she possibly could, she was only human, and many twigs snapped along her path. Fearing the worst, Kim looked up. The bear wasn't looking at her, but its paw was visibly caught in a bear trap. She could see the glint of metal mixed with blood and fur. The growls and groaning were actually cries of pain and misery.
Too bad,
she thought.
It's a bear, and I'm not dying because of it.
Kim snuck away further, the cries ringing in her ears. The sad, mournful cries. It dug at her heart. She loved animals, not enough to die for them though.
It's not like it's a puppy stuck in a cage or wanting a snack.
She argued with herself.
It'll probably break free and then it will want to eat me.
Looking back at the bear, Kim saw it lay down, exhausted, blood slowly running down its paw. A mournful cry rang out from its throat. It would probably die stuck in that trap.
Oh, shit.
She whispered. Looking around for a large branch, seeing one not too big for her, Kim picked it up and started to move towards the bear. Within seconds, the bear spotted her and growled. It was a soft growl, too tired to put up any real fight. Kim stepped closer. The bear was a grizzly. Blood covered its brown fur along the stuck paw and mouth of this giant beast. Its large body was heaving in distress and agony. The bear attempted to stand up and move away, but the trap pulled at its paw and it collapsed in pain. Kim took another step closer, holding her paw weapon up, ready to bring it down on the bear if needed. The bear stared at her with deep black eyes, seeming to be trying to ask for something. For her to free it? Kill it? Let it feast on her flesh? Sighing, it lay down, seeming to accept its fate, ready to die at the hands of this small hunter. Lowering the branch, Kim sunk down closer to the bear, her fast-pounding heart breaking for it. Gripping the trap with both hands, holding her breath, she wrestles to remove it. After great struggle and care not to injure the large creature further, The trap whinges as it's pulled apart, just enough for the paw to be released. A loud clang echoes through the trees as Kim tosses it aside, its iron jaws crashing together once more. There's a long pause, in which Kim expects to be attacked by the bear, and the bear waits for death. Sweat gathers in her brows as she puffs her unsteady breaths. Realizing that it's free, the bear carefully stands up, looking down at Kim. It silently stares into her eyes. A primal world lives in those eyes, a world of fear and hunger. Is this the part where he eats her? Are these eyes the last thing she will see? With a small grunt, perhaps of gratitude, it turns away, slowly walking clumsily into the woods. Kim takes a deep breath, gripping the dirt beneath her knees, and crawls away, tears of fear running down her cheeks.
That was crazy and stupid.
She berated herself.
I gotta get out of here.
Rushing away as quietly as she can, putting as much distance between her and the bear as possible.
This is so frustrating.
Kim pulls out her map and compass, trying to find a way to continue in the general direction of the mountaintop. Already having been forced to turn around a number of times to try and find higher ground, only to be blocked by a river or shrubbery too thick to pass through, or yet another cliff face. She hadn't made much progress.
Hang on.
Kim said to herself.
Isn't that the same place where I saw the bear?
Keeping an eye out for any movement in the woods, she crept closer and spotted the trap lying in the shrubs.
I'm going in circles. Plus, there's a bear around here somewhere.
Hurrying in the opposite direction of where the bear walked off, she shortly came across a tiny glade. Sitting down, Kim put her head in her hands. This isn't working. The sky was growing dark again. Kim was too busy swimming in her self-pity to notice. This is meant to be a challenging but easier and fun hike. At least easier compared to the Canol Heritage Trail.
And now, I might die here.
Kim sighed, tears in her eyes. She raised her head to look around. Fresh breeze ruffled her hair gently. Kim closed her eyes. She felt the grass on her skin, cool and gentle as it swayed with the wind. She heard the song of a bird in the distance, calling to its mate to return to the nest for the night. She smelt the scent of the wildflowers close by, pollen for the bees to feed their young with. Feeling better, Kim refocused.
I need a new plan. Getting to higher ground isn't working right now, so what else can I aim for?
Pulling out her map, Kim searched for a landmark that might be close by.
This river runs through most of this area. Even though it'll take longer, I'll be able to follow it back to the main road here.
Tracing the river with her finger. With a new plan in mind, she tried to remember in which direction she had seen the river last. It was too dark to continue, but in the morning, she'd be able to try again. She was going to make it home, and when she did, she'd have a little break from adventuring. Getting lost was one thing, but being lost, finding and freeing a bear was too much. Kim lay down in the dark and quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the stress of the day. Chapter 3. Lurking in the dark. She woke up confused. It was still dark, but something had woken her. The sound of branches breaking growing closer sent shivers down her spine. It stopped, close by. She could hear it breathing heavily. Kim was being watched. She didn't think she was being watched. She knew she was being watched. She held as still as possible, hoping that it couldn't see her properly. She certainly couldn't see it. Tension built in the still, dark air. Suddenly, there was a horrifying screeching and the sound of something large crashing through the trees towards her. It swiped at her, catching her shoulder as she bolted away in the woods, screaming in terror. She ran in the darkness, faster than she had ever run in her life. The murderous creature behind her, growling, screeching, drawing closer. Its labored breath was felt on the back of Kim's neck. Any second now, it would take her down permanently. Kim was in the air as the ground had disappeared underneath her. The darkness swallowed her whole as the creature stopped and screamed at the edge of the cliff she had ran off of. Landing heavily, Kim heard the creature sliding down to follow her. Ignoring any pain, she darted to the trunk of a tree and started to climb. Climbing onto the lower branches, she hugged the trunk, desperate to disappear into the bark. Keeping as silent as possible, Kim heard the creature run past her, charging through the woods, intent on devouring its meal. She listened as it searched for her, smashing through shrubs, growling and screaming in an attempt to scare her out of her hiding spot. Its growls eventually growing more distant. A screech of frustration and anger was heard in the distance. Kim had managed to escape. This time, she waited in the silent, terror-filled air. She waited, listening for any sounds of movement, growling, or any hint of the creature at all. Only the screaming from her aching legs, begging her to get down from the tree, convinced Kim to slowly climb down. She was alone, without her equipment, but she had lost the creature.
What on earth was that thing?
Kim stretched her sore legs as she questioned herself.
Whatever it was, I don't want to meet it again.
Rubbing her shoulder, sore from the single swipe she'd received, she walked away slowly with her hand on the cliff face. Risking injury was better than waiting to see if the creature would come back. She had to find a safer place to hide and sleep. What was she going to do? Standing outside the entrance to a small cave, Kim hesitated. The night was getting colder as it had started to rain. Was it worth the risk to enter? As the chilled wind picked up, the call of a warm sleep lured her inside. Stepping carefully, she made her way to the back of the small space, grateful for the immediate change in temperature. The cave, thankfully, appeared to be empty. Laying down on the firm ground, she closed her eyes. She listened to the sounds of rain outside of her new bedroom and wondered about what had attacked her.
It was too small to be a bear. Maybe a cougar? I'd never heard anything make that sound before, though.
Sleep almost took her when the sounds of movement outside shocked Kim's eyes open.
Oh no, it's found me.
Kim shivered and pressed her body harder onto the ground, hoping that it would swallow her whole. Wide eyes staring at the entrance, she sees a silhouette staring back at her. The thing is huge. It almost blocked the entire entrance. There was no getting past it, even if she could try to escape. She could smell the rain and dirt on its body as it stepped further into the cave. It sniffed the air, possibly smelling her damp clothes and salty tears. It favored one of its legs.
Hang on.
Kim paused in confusion.
It's the bear. It's the same bear as before.
A moment of relief was quickly kicked out of her head.
Oh, I'm definitely dead now.
The bear took another step inside, sniffing and looking at Kim. He seemed more curious than anything else. Getting closer, Kim whimpered. She felt the bear's nose on the top of her head as she buried her face in her arms. He paused, then took a step back, turned, and lay down in front of the entrance, completely blocking her way, licking at its paw. Being completely frozen with fear, she waited to see what the bear was going to do. Sleep was desperate to overwhelm her. Her body shivered from the cold now. She pulled herself into a tight ball and closed her eyes. She thought of home, of her friends, of her regrets, and mostly of her family. Would they ever find out what happened to her if she died here? Would they ever have peace? Picturing her mum, broken-hearted from losing her daughter, Kim was brought to tears. Through the sniffs, she heard the bear move again. Head shooting up towards the bear, she watched him shift over towards her. Just a little. His back was still to her, and he was still licking his paw. But now his warm fur was touching her face. Kim foolishly reached out with a hand and placed it on the fur. The bear didn't move. The fur was fairly dry and warm. So very warm. Kim moved her body closer to the bear, pausing to see if the bear was going to move. He seemed to stop licking when she moved, but continued at each pause. Soon Kim was leaning against the bear's back, warmed by its fur. Sighing in dumb luck relief, she closed her eyes. If she was going to die, she might as well die warm in her sleep. The slow, deep breaths of the bear curled around her body comforted Kim as she awoke. It was foolish to believe that she could trust a bear. But as she continued to listen to the light snoring of this strange one, she couldn't help herself.
Surely, if the bear was going to hurt me, it would have done it by now.
She turned her head to look at the bear's face. The small movement shook the bear awake. He turned its eyes to Kim. The intelligent eyes seemed to say, "Trust me." Sniffing the air, the bear slowly stands and walks towards the mouth of the cave. He looks back at her for a short time, then leaves. Kim sat on the hard ground for a while before venturing forth to peek out of the cave. She watched as the bear returned with a chunk of bush in its mouth. Tilting her head in curiosity, she waited. Still limping, the bear approached and drops what looks to be a berry bush of some kind, then stepped away.
I recognize those.
Kim says aloud, shuffling closer to the bush.
They're winter berries.
Reaching out to grab a handful of berries, she stuffed them into her mouth with the passion of a long-lost lover. Food.
Seems that terror makes you pretty hungry.
Kim thought to herself as the winterberry juice ran down her fingers. Watching the bear a short distance away, licking at its paw again, she admits to herself that she's feeling a lot better. The food and the sleep did wonders for her mood. Feeling hopeful again, Kim stood and approached the bear with the remaining winterberries.
Thank you, big guy.
She spoke sweetly to him, holding out the berries as an offering of peace. The bear ignored her and continued to lick his paw.
That's still hurting you a lot, huh?
Leaning over to see better, Kim spots a small piece of metal wedged into its paw.
Oh, you poor thing.
Squatting down, she reached out towards it. Growling, the bear pulls away.
It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you, honey.
Speaking softly, Kim crept a little closer while the bear held still.
If you don't let me get that out, it's not going to heal properly.
Ever so gently, she gripped the tip of metal and slowly pulled it out. The bear flinched and moved away once it was removed.
There you go. Doesn't that feel better?
Kim cooed as the bear resumed licking, stroking his fur and talking kindly. She continued to comfort him. Heat flushed into her face.
I think I have a bear friend.
She giggled slightly at the strange thought.
I don't think Mom would approve, though.
Standing up, Kim looked around.
I'm pretty sure I came from that direction last night.
Squaring her shoulders, she began walking. If she was going to have any hope of getting out of here, she'd need her equipment. Hearing a sound behind her, Kim looked back to see the bear following.
At least I'll have some company.
Retracing her path back to the campsite wasn't easy. Running in the dark in pure terror sadly doesn't leave much time for markers. But after a few hours, she stumbles into her campsite. The chaos of the previous night was more extreme in the light of day. Her items were thrown around the small space, her map ripped into tiny pieces, and her phone smashed. Did the creature come back to wait for her? Destroying her items in frustration? Kim squatted lower to the ground. This might mean that the animal was close by, waiting and still hunting her. Desperate, she crept around looking for anything salvageable, a can of food, a large piece of her map, an undamaged bottle of water. Nothing. It was obvious that anything that was edible had been picked over by many animals and everything else had been destroyed. Even her sleeping bag had been ripped apart.
Without my map and compass, I'm not going to be able to find my way.
Kim whispered, turning to the bear. He was staring intently into the trees. A growl escaped his lips. Kim ducked down further and tried to spy the animal lurking in the woods. Only the sound of dashing through the underbrush informed her that the creature had run off. Kim's little bear friend had scared it off. She was safe with him. Standing tall, Kim looked at him with surprise and gratitude.
Thanks again.
He turned towards her voice, holding her gaze for a moment before turning to re-enter the woods. Kim quickly darted towards him. Whatever it was that had tried to kill her last night hadn't given up. But it had a weakness. It feared the bear. As far as she was concerned, he was her safest option. Following the bear for a couple of hours, they came upon a cabin. Its windows dark and dusty, the porch covered in old leaves and fallen over chairs. It was clearly abandoned.
I see you're a homeowner too, huh?
Kim joked to the bear.
I'm starting to think that Mom might actually like you, buddy.
Walking up the stairs, she pushed the door gently, stepping inside when it swung open welcomingly. Finding a few useful items, including bedding, firewood, and even a working fishing pole, Kim liked her chances of survival now. Chapter 4. Momentarily safe. Since winter's first snow had fallen, Kim decided that traveling along the river without proper gear and shelter was too dangerous. Spending the next couple of days searching the woods close to the cabin, she located a fair number of winterberry bushes and the nearby river. She was confident that she'd be at least comfortable for the next few days.
I've been out here for 6 days now.
Kim calculated while she paced.
I let my roommate know that I'm on an 8-day hike. So when I don't call her in a couple of days, she'll worry, and I'm sure we'll call the police. Then they'll organize a search party for me.
Kim twisted her hands in worry.
They'll probably make her wait a day or two before getting people to actually look for me, though, and then they might not find me for a few days, maybe even a week or two. So I'll need to survive until then.
She mumbled. Her two main goals to survive would be to find more food and find a way to signal for help. Looking out across the field in front of the cabin, Kim watched the bear for a moment. He had been a consistent companion over the last few days. She would often see him wandering around the area, sniffing and searching. It seemed like he was ensuring that nothing came close to threaten her. At night, he would enter the cabin and lay close to her, keeping warm by the fire and listening as Kim read aloud the book she had found in the cabin. Occasionally he would leave to forage for his own food, but he would always return. Sometimes with another winterberry branch, once even with some wildflowers, making her laugh.
Such a thoughtful bear friend.
She'd joke.
Well, I better see if I can catch some fish.
Gathering up the fishing rod, a bucket, and blankets, Kim trekked out to the river's edge. Settling down, making herself comfortable, she clumsily cast her line. After a few failed attempts, she finally caught her first fish. Throwing it into the bucket, she cast her line again. She'll need a few to last her, just in case. The bear came to her side, lured by the smell of fish. Unhooking the one she'd just caught, Kim threw it to him, smiling as he dug in.
I think I'm gonna have to give you a name.
She thought for a moment.
How about Ryan? After Ryan Reynolds? He's pretty hot.
Looking over at her newly named bear friend, Kim laughed as he chewed loudly on the fish.
Yeah, you're definitely a Ryan.
Recasting her line again, Ryan quickly devoured his fish and sniffed around for another.
Hey, keep your nose out of my bucket. I'll catch you another in a minute.
Kim shooed Ryan away. With a snort, he turned and took a step towards the river, walking in calmly. In short order, he had caught a fish. Carrying it to the bank, he sat down to eat.
Show off,
Kim retorted. Soon Ryan was chasing fish with enthusiasm, running and splashing around.
Oi! You're gonna scare away the fish.
Putting down the rod, Kim took a small step into the water, leaned down and splashed Ryan. He turned to look at her, before thumping his paw down, creating a large splash all over Kim.
Hey!
She shouted at Ryan's back as he turned away. With a smile, she entered the water too and tried to catch the fish that darted in between the rocks, failing miserably. Ryan grunted as he watched Kim.
Are you laughing at me?
She accused. He nudged her a little while walking past and she playfully pushed him back. The sun was getting lower in the trees when Kim and Ryan walked back to the cabin. They were exhausted from their day of fishing, but with a bucket full of fish, they were triumphant. Quickly stripping down to her knickers, Kim wrung out her dripping wet clothes and hung them in front of the still burning fire. Wrapping herself in a dry blanket, she lay down on the floor next to a tired Ryan, cuddling up for warmth. She remembered how hesitant she was about freeing him from that bear trap just days beforehand. Who knew what would have happened if she hadn't? Giving him a little kiss on the nose, she whispered,
I am so grateful to have you, my sweet Ryan.
Kim sat at the riverbank collecting chunks of clay, mixing in the crushed flour she had, hoping for the clay to change color. Sadly, this was ineffective. Another 2 days had passed, and while she was able to collect enough resources to help her survival, it was almost time for the search parties to begin. If she couldn't find a way to signal her location, she might not be found, and that was too scary to consider. Kim had already mixed some winterberries with snow and spelt SOS in the small field in front of the cabin, but it didn't take long for the snow to either melt away, diluting the attempt, or for more snow to cover her work. She needed something that would stand out for longer. Staring at the clay as it started to dry out a little, Kim decided that she'd try to write a message using branches covered in clay and a whole bunch of winterberries to color it as best as she could.
If I do it on the roof, it might look more out of place there, and even if it snows, it won't be walked on by the wildlife.
Not that many animals had visited, Ryan wasn't an inviting creature to other animals. Standing and grabbing her bucket, Kim traveled along the river, collecting as many chunks of clay as she could find, hoping to find any that had unusual colors. An hour later, her bucket was full, and Kim turned to head back. Lost in thought, she slipped on an icy rock. Able to catch herself before crashing into the river beneath her, her ankle was caught briefly.
Ah! Ouch!
Kim bent down to rub her ankle.
That really hurts.
Shaking it off, she started to walk away from the river's edge and closer to the drier tree line. It didn't take long for Kim to start limping, slowing her pace due to the pain that was increasing with each step.
Oh, damn it.
She cursed.
Oh, it's gonna take ages to get back.
Stubbornly, she continued. A twisted ankle wasn't ideal, but she wasn't going to let it distract her. Listening to the sounds that surrounded her, she took a moment, with closed eyes, to ground herself. One of the sounds was a familiar one, though. She smiled as she opened her eyes and saw Ryan walk casually out of the trees.
I'm glad to see you.
She reached out to rub his fur as he walked up to her side.
Keep me company while I walk?
She took a few more slow limping steps before she felt Ryan nudge her. Kim watched in confusion as Ryan leaned his head under her waist and moved his body in front of her.
You offering me a lift?
Gingerly, she climbed onto his broad back, feeling his strong muscles underneath her as he walked carefully back to the cabin once she was on.
Oh, I'm glad you're on my side. I think you've earned an extra fish tonight, too.
Sighing in relief, Kim was glad to accept the help. Back at the cabin, Kim spent the rest of the day throwing branches onto the roof, carefully climbing up to spread the clay, flowers, and winterberry juice in a large SOS.
Here's hoping it works.
She crossed her fingers while admiring her work. Ryan grunted in the distance. Looking out to watch him for a moment, Kim began to worry. Ryan's body language had changed. He paced, huffed, and sniffed.
He hasn't acted like that for a while. Not since the day
Cold shiver of fear ran through Kim's body.
Not since the day I found my last campsite.
Remembering the terror of the creature that attacked her and the horror of expecting to die many times that night froze her deeply. Climbing down from the roof, she sunk low to the ground and peered between the trees, seeing nothing. Ryan continued to pace for a while before eventually calming down. Whatever was watching seemed to have left. Feeling her heartbeat return to her, Kim took a deep breath, entering the cabin and locking the door behind her. Ryan refused to come inside that night, simply waiting and watching at the front door instead. Chapter 5. The Sounds of Rescue. The sounds of a helicopter drew closer as Kim threw more wood on her small bonfire. Was she willing to burn the whole place down to get their attention? Waving and screaming as the helicopter flew over her abandoned cabin in the woods, she searched for any sign that they had seen her. A person leaning out of a window waving. A long hover over the berry-stained roof. Or simply eye contact with someone, anyone. The helicopter did another lap around the area before disappearing again.
Was it enough? Please have seen me.
She whispered to herself. Ryan grunted, grabbing her attention as he wandered out into the woods again, searching for more food.
What should I do about Ryan? Will he scare away the rescue team? Will they try and hurt him?
She worried. She loved Ryan. He made her feel safe. He made her smile. He was honestly kinder to her than some of her exes had been. She couldn't let anyone hurt him. She wouldn't let anyone hurt him. Kim occupied herself reading the book outside, close to the bonfire to keep warm. She had considered moving down the river to keep the rescue team away from Ryan, but she knew it would be foolish. If the helicopter had spotted her, they'd be looking for her here. She had to stay and wait.
Hello?
Called a voice from the woods. Shooting upright, Kim yelled.
I'm here!
Running towards the voice, she spots a man. He was very tall, had the body of a hiker, long dark hair, and a brilliant smile on his face.
Hey, I've been looking for you.
Overcome with joy, Kim rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his neck.
I'm so glad you found me!
She cried. He rubbed her back stiffly before Kim pulled herself away.
Sorry.
It's okay. I understand.
He replied, a welcomed grin on his face.
My name's Joe.
Kim introduced herself, walking back towards the cabin, with Joe right behind her.
Where's the rest of the team?
Asked Kim.
They're out there. We split up to cover more ground.
He answered.
I was just lucky enough to be close by when the helicopter spotted you.
Oh, that makes sense.
Kim paused for a moment.
I should warn you about the bear that's been helping me.
Bear?
Joe queried.
I haven't seen a bear around.
Kim went on to explain what had happened to her during the last few days, the smile fading from Joe's face replaced with surprise.
Well, I must say I'm impressed.
Joe said with raised eyebrows.
Not only have you survived out here, alone for about a week, you've made friends with a bear. You're almost like a fairy tale princess.
Kim blushed under his gaze.
Sadly, the bear probably won't come around since I'm here.
Joe stated with regret.
It won't trust me, so it'll probably stay away.
That is a shame.
Kim thought.
Ryan might like you.
Joe smiled.
By the sounds of it, I think I'd like him too. Come on, let's get warmer inside. In the morning, we'll start hiking to the pickup point.
Joe advised, standing up and gathering the fish that had been cooking over the fireplace. Kim looked out of the window and saw the gathering darkness.
Seems like a good plan.
They talked as they ate, discussing plans and what life was like for each of them outside of the woods. Kim started to relax more as she got to know Joe. He was actually kinda amazing. Working as a teacher, he had been volunteering for the search and rescue team for about 3 years now, helping to locate and safely bring home at least 7 people. Finally climbing into the makeshift bed, Kim allowed herself to drift peacefully to sleep, hoping to see Ryan in the morning and say goodbye.
Ryan!
Kim yelled into the woods.
Ryan?
Her shoulders sunk as she was met with silence. Ryan hadn't returned.
Joe must have been right. Ryan's not coming back because he's here.
A small part of Kim resented that Joe was there for a moment before shaking it off. She had to get home. She picked up the bucket of remaining fish and left it by a tree, hoping that this gift would help Ryan understand that she needed to go.
Thank you.
She whispered a goodbye. The sound of Joe opening the door alerted her that it was time to leave.
Ready?
He asked gently.
Yeah.
Kim grabbed a small bag Joe gave her to hold her essential items in.
Let's go.
Allowing Joe to lead the way, Kim followed with a feeling of regret. She's going to miss him. Joe had been chatting happily since they had left the cabin, only pausing to ask her a question every now and then. Kim hadn't been paying that much attention. She was searching the woods as they traveled, hoping to spot a familiar furry face. But hours had passed, and there was no sign of Ryan.
Hey, you paying attention?
Joe demanded playfully.
Yes.
Kim answered distractedly. Joe laughed.
No, you're not. But I understand. Haven't spotted Ryan yet?
Kim shook her head sadly. Joe placed his hand gently on her shoulder.
Stop here for lunch?
Joe suggested kindly, dropping his gear on the ground with her nod.
How far until we get picked up?
Kim asked quietly.
Not much further. Maybe 2 more hours. Get started on your lunch. I'm gonna pee first.
Joe walked off between the trees while Kim sat down, pulling out an energy bar from her bag. Chewing, Kim listened to the woods surrounding her. Soon she'll be heading home. Her family and friends would be so happy. Mum would probably make Kim stay with her for a long time before letting her go again. Kim smiled at the idea. Thinking about seeing her family again helped ease the pain of not seeing Ryan one last time. Closing her eyes, soon she'll be home. She was grateful. A loud crack, followed with searing pain, turned Kim's world black. Chapter 6. Caught in despair. Throbbing in her head and pain in her wrists met Kim as she awoke. It was dark. She could barely see anything. Only a dim light from a candle allowed Kim to see that she was deep in a cave. Surrounded by dusty containers of food, buckets of murky water, and a pile of old blankets, it was obvious that someone had been living here for a long time. Unable to move, Kim realized she was bound to a chair.
Awake, are we?
Asked a deep, scratchy voice from a shadowed corner.
What happened?
Kim questioned groggily.
Well, when you escaped me last time, I needed to come up with a new plan, didn't I?
The voice explained.
Usually, I'm able to capture my prey easily. You've been an unwelcomed challenge, especially with that bear.
The voice spat the last sentence out. Kim looked deeply into the shadows. Following the sound of the voice, she spotted Joe sitting on a small chair. The air turned frosty under the shine of a carving knife in his hand.
Why?
She whispered.
Why not?
Joe laughed. The sound caused her head to throb more.
I'm a hunter. A real hunter.
He stared at her with disdain.
And a hunter needs prey. I've been living off of the land for years now. So much prey has crossed my path.
Lifting the knife until the candlelight caught the edge.
Each of them begging for mercy at the end.
With a laugh, Joe stood up and moved towards a rotting box close by, opening the lid, revealing a collection of strange items.
Every hunter needs a trophy from their prey.
He pulled up a familiar item. Kim recognized it as her own compass.
I took this that first night after I'd lost you. But the fact that I hadn't earned it frustrates me.
Joe growled to himself, dropping the compass back into the box.
But I have now. You're my prey, and you won't escape me again.
Sitting back down on his chair, Joe continued.
My favorite kind of prey are the females, though.
He grinned at her coldly.
You all think you're so strong and independent. You all think that you can face the same challenges as a hunter and succeed.
He laughed cruelly.
You're all weak. You all know this too. That's why you're the best prey. The realization in your eyes that you're gonna die at the hands of a real hunter is ecstasy.
Joe flung his head back and screamed the word, fists raised, pure joy in his tone. Looking back at Kim with a smirk.
You all scream and beg for the pain to stop before I kill you, though.
Standing, he approached Kim, knife raised slightly.
Wait.
Kim begged. A creepy smile stretched across Joe's face.
I want to know why you didn't kill me when I came back to the campsite.
Joe stopped and tilted his head.
Stalling for time, huh? That's okay. I don't mind a bit of conversation beforehand.
He sat back down on the chair. Kim twisted her wrists a little, testing the ropes that bound her to the chair.
To be honest, that bear of yours has been a real pain in the ass.
Joe stated.
When I saw you had returned to your campsite, I had planned on taking you then. But then I saw that fucking bear.
Joe whispered in a growl.
I have no idea how you managed to tame it. Maybe it got taken in by your weak feminine tricks.
He leaned towards her with a grin that sent shivers down her spine.
You little girls are all the same.
Shrugging, he leaned back.
Even after you found that cabin, that bear still hung around. I'd try to get closer and that bear would sniff me out immediately. I was forced to wait.
Joe's face grew dark as he relived his frustration.
I had to get rid of it. A hunter shouldn't be kept from their prey.
His eyes lifted to Kim's.
So I built a trap and lured him.
A small gasp escaped from Kim's trembling lips.
He's just a dumb animal, not worthy to be prey.
Joe stood and began to pace.
I lured it to the edge of a cliff.
Joe smiled slightly.
One push was all it took.
A murderous laugh echoed from his throat.
Definitely not worth the hunt.
He took a step closer to Kim, eyes fixed on her face, as tears ran down her cheeks.
I don't believe you,
she whispered. Joe laughed mockingly.
Do you see it anywhere? Oh, you should have heard the pathetic cries it uttered at the bottom. Stupid animal.
Kim turned her head from his gloating, blinking the tears away from her eyes.
I'm gonna die here, and no one will find my body.
She thought. Images of her family and friends flashed through her mind.
They will never know what happened. They'll never know if I'm alive or dead. I have to get out of here.
The sound of a breaking twig cracked outside of the cave.
Help!
Kim screamed.
I'm in here!
Using all of the air in her lungs, she screamed towards a single hope. Joe laughed while Kim struggled against her ropes.
No one will hear you here. No one comes close to here. I haven't been caught a single time, and I've had so many in here.
Joe pushed his face into hers.
No one here to hear you scream, except for me.
His gleeful grin stretched his face, insanity in his dark eyes.
This is gonna be fun.
Lifting the knife to her cheek, Joe pressed it into the skin, making a small, long cut. Shooting pain ran down her face into the jaw. Kim gritted her teeth, holding back a cry. Joe laughed and moved the knife away.
Try and be brave, little prey. They all break eventually. But don't worry, we have plenty of time.
Moving the knife to Kim's arm, Joe whipped his head up at the sound of a louder thud in front of the cave. Before Kim could try screaming out for help, he stuffed a gag into her mouth.
I'll be right back.
Walking to the mouth of the cave, knife raised. Kim desperately struggled in her bonds, searching around for anything sharp within reach that she could use to escape. A roar of pure anger erupted from outside, followed by a scream of terror and pain. Crushing branches, scraping of rock and dirt, and grunts of exertion sounded the brawl outside. Kim wrestled her bounds with renewed vigor, rescue only meters away. With a muffled scream, she finally pulled a hand free, ripping the ropes and gag away from her body. Kim ran towards the sounds of fighting. A final scream sounded from her throat as the fatal blow was dealt. Kim dashed out from the cave, eyes on the gruesome scene before her, touched by the first rays of dawn. Ryan lay still in the dirt, breathing heavy, clearly in pain, only a few steps away. Kim's mind flashed to the moment when she first met him.
He found me,
she whispered as she gingerly stepped out of the cave, spotting Joe's limp and mangled body a short distance away. His face bloodied, his chest compacted, the knife stained with her blood still clutched in his cold, dead fingers. Moving quickly, Kim reached Ryan's side.
Oh, please be okay.
Her fingers gently searched his great body. Blood and loose fur soon saturated her trembling hands. Ryan remained still. Time passed slowly as Kim discovered wounds on Ryan's body, bruising from a great fall, knife slices, and the trembling breath of exhaustion. All seemed minor, and Kim sighed in relief. She lay her head on her hero's shoulder. Ryan shifted his head towards her, clearly too tired to move more than that. They had survived. A shout sounded out from between the trees, followed by another. The sounds of people moving parallel to Kim's position echoed through the woods.
I'm here!
Kim screamed with all the tension and desperation built up from the days of being lost in the woods and almost murdered at least twice. The sounds turned towards her, creating excitement between the members of the rescue team that arrived. The smiles that greeted her quickly faded as their eyes landed on the scene surrounding the source of their rescue. Tears streaming down her face, Kim lifted herself from the ground and stood in between Ryan and the team.
It's okay. He's not going to hurt you. He's my friend,
she said quietly. Looks of bewilderment shifted between members before one of them stepped forward. A middle-aged lady with long red hair tied back behind her, a look of concern on her face.
Are you okay?
She asked carefully.
Are you Kim Green?
Kim nodded.
My name is Charlotte, and we've been looking for you.
Charlotte's smile touched her eyes as Kim approached her with gratitude and relief.
I think you'd better fill us in. Well, that's a lot.
Charlotte sighed. She had settled in for the story Kim delivered, in awe of her bravery and luck. The others of the rescue team had already contacted the other search parties, and the police were on their way to investigate the scene of Joe's evil intent and resulting destruction. Ryan rested behind Kim, watchful and kind eyes softening the hearts of many nearby nervous members.
When you're ready, we'll get you out of here. I'm sure you're aware of how worried your family is.
Kim nodded, glancing back at Ryan, his eyes meeting hers as he slowly raised to his feet. Placing a hand on his strong shoulder, Kim replied,
We're ready.
Gathering together, the rescue team, their missing person, and a new and unusual friend entered the woods to begin the journey home. As they traveled together, Kim collected and fed winterberries to Ryan, her rescuers astonished by the care and comfort the two offered each other. She bragged about how sweet her bear friend was to her, delighting the team with stories of gifted flowers and caught fish. Stepping onto a dirt road, Kim spied several vehicles, surrounded by people cheering as she appeared. She had reached her way out of the woods. Turning to look at Ryan, he looked nervously at the gathering crowd, reluctant to leave the trees. Charlotte moved forward to wave everyone off, giving the two a moment alone. Ryan looked into Kim's eyes. He seemed to understand that this was goodbye. He took a small step towards her. Kim threw her arms around his neck. Hugging him tight, she whispered into his furry shoulder,
Thank you, my sweet hero, my bear friend. I'll never forget you.
Ryan licked the side of her face, his large wet tongue surprisingly cool as it wiped the tears off her cheek. With a last long look, he turned and walked back towards his home. The sound of Kim's whispered goodbye, trailing behind.
Goodbye.
No matter her fear, no matter the pain, she knew this experience would be one she would treasure forever. Chapter 7. Final Steps. A year later, and Kim was grateful for the end of the court proceedings. Joe had been officially named as the murderer of many young ladies and men who had fallen victim to his hunting illusion. The heartbroken families finally given an answer of what happened to their loved ones. The personal items that had been collected as trophies were returned to them. A generous amount of donations had been raised to support the families with their journey through therapy and trauma healing. Kim had been an uncomfortable but persistent face of the donation requests to provide this assistance. Joe's body was unclaimed, cremated and buried in the cold graveyard of a prison, away from any person who sought further revenge on his ashes. His grave marker deemed to remain uncared for until it scattered away in the winds of time. No tears were shed in his name. Kim reclaimed her life with the determination that saved her life in the woods that previous year. Her return home was one of joy tainted by the regret and longing for her missed Ryan. She had been contacted by many news stations begging for her story. A publisher promised to help her create a book, and many videos surfaced from influencers claiming to be her best friend, making her giggle at their blatant idiocy. She endured it all, staying to help the families of Joe's victims first. Now she was taking time for herself, finally at peace with the offense. The scar on her cheek had faded along with the pain of the memory. Currently, she was standing still, with closed eyes, listening to the sounds that surrounded her. A song of a bird, the wind blowing in the leaves of the nearby trees, the breaking of a branch under a heavy foot. She smiled as she opened her eyes and turned towards the sound. Greeted with a familiar grunt, Kim walked towards her bear friend Ryan. Reunited again.